So as Nam Judah states, everyone has a story, right? And they're short stories, they're encounters, they're things that are situations where we're able to either learn something very interesting, very impactful as well. Right? We are going to hear from one of today's modern storytellers, Soledad O'Brien. But before we get there, we have another one of our employees, Yoli, who recently just shared her story with TED Talk Seattle. Yoli will share her story as well with us. We're very fortunate. And ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Yoli Chisholm.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see if this clickers. Thank you very much to my Microsoft colleagues, distinguished guests. I am honored to be able to pay tribute to my fellow Xhosa tribesman and elder, Mr. Nelson Mandela, and in doing so, share with you a few thoughts about the importance of ancestry and honoring those who have come before us. There is an African proverb that goes, "He who listens to the voice of the elder is like a strong tree, but he who covers his ears is like a branch in the wind." The essence of this proverb is rooted in the ancient African practice of honoring our ancestors and the belief that in our life cycle, from the cradle to the grave, our ancestors can play a key role in who we become and how we live our lives. Do you know how you came to be here? Who came before you? What did they sacrifice? What is their story? Which, by the way, is your story. I believe this applies to companies and countries as well, in that in a company's life cycle, from the founding to the decline, the founders and their vision play a key role in the continued success and impact of that company. What is your founder's story? Is your company a strong tree, or is it a branch flailing in the wind? There came a time when I looked at my children who have been raised in North America, and I realized that there was a gap in how I approach life and how they did. They were missing the undergirding, the foundation of the stories about our ancestors. They were missing a powerful source of strength. I stand before you, Yoli, a member of the Tembu branch of the Xhosa tribe, and I am confident that I am a strong tree because I know the stories of those who came before me. And now my children do too. There is a story in each of you that can give you perspective, power, perseverance, and poise. Each story I tell my children is like a strong root that goes deeper than anything they encounter in their daily lives. One of our favorite stories is that of my great-grandfather and their great-grandfather, Z.K. Matthews. This is an image of him shaking hands with President Lyndon Johnson in the White House. And his story reminds the kids that there was a time when he was one chosen of his siblings to receive an education, and he never took it for granted. He became the first Black man in South Africa to receive a BA. He got a law degree and went on to study at the London School of Economics with Branislaw Malinowski. Now keep in mind, my grandfather grew up in Africa in the early 1900s under a racist apartheid regime, and yet maximized every opportunity he was given. When you think about the great companies, those that have had significant degrees of impact in this world, and you think about their founders and their perspective and how they view the world, people like Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Akio Morita. 5, 10, 50 years in, is that perspective still alive within the company? For those of you who are descended of immigrants, do you know what it took to get here? Is that perspective and that desire to survive what was an unknown journey ahead, is it alive within you? Is it alive within your children? Power. When my kids are feeling powerless, I tell them that their great-grandfather became a professor, and one of his students was Nelson Mandela. He actually taught many African leaders who went on to play significant roles in the liberation of their respective countries. But my grandfather had no idea what his students would go on to do in their lives. But I do like to think that his personal milestones, his firsts, were like seeds of what was possible that took root in the lives of his students. What are the seeds that have been sown by your ancestors? Do you think that your desire to be an entrepreneur, a CEO, do you think that started with you? Your talent for cooking, for coding, for preaching, your desire to want to change the world, do you think that started with you? Imagine the affirmation Oprah must have felt when she was told one of her ancestors built a school way before she did. Perhaps you too are watering a tree that was planted before you existed. Perseverance. When the kids can't see the light at the end of a tunnel in a situation, I remind them that their great-grandfather once sat in a jail cell alongside Mr. Nelson Mandela and many others like him, simply for wanting the right to be treated like a human being. You know, Mr. Mandela had no idea when he was going to be freed. That took 27 years. But what he did know, and what he had always known, was that he was descended from leaders. That in his bloodline were leaders. And so he persevered. There was a time I couldn't stand on this stage in front of you and talk to you as an equal. If it wasn't for the work of people like Dr. Martin Luther King. What are the obstacles in your life, in your company, in your country that once seemed impossible? Let the knowledge of them and how they were overcome give you the strength to persevere. Poise. Dr. King and my grandfather were peers, connected by their work in the clergy. And 1968 proved to be a fateful year. In that year, they were both invited to speak at the World Council of Churches, the fourth assembly that was to happen in Sweden in July of that year. Dr. King was to speak on our common Christian witness, and my grandfather on the churches and the human need. Alas, they both never made it to that event, as Dr. King was assassinated in April of that month, and my grandfather fell ill in May of that month and died. And he was here in the US when he died, and he was flown back on Air Force One. He had the respect of the sitting US president. But what I tell my children is that the poise that he had within him was within his father and his father before him. It's within me, and it's within them. Mr. Mandela, as you know, was a remarkably poised individual, an extraordinarily humble human being. And he had tremendous respect for my grandfather. And even after his death, he corresponded with my grandmother. And I want to read one of the letters that he wrote her, an excerpt from her memoirs that she wrote for her grandkids and her great-grandkids to be able to read. Mr. Mandela says, "My dear Rakhadi, my dear aunt, it is now 14 years since I received your terrific letter, which brought the kind of message we would expect from one who shared the life of ZK and whose love and support helped make him such a dynamic and stable figure. Despite its age, the letter is as fresh and inspiring today as it was when I read it for the first time. It is the type of spiritual equipment that has a magical effect on the 1,000 wounds a man carries in his heart, that gives one the strength and patience to suffer the horror of the shade and to live beyond eternity." He goes on to say, "My friends and I are keeping well and in high spirits." This was in 1985. "As you know, in a matter of 6 months, I will have completed a whole stretch of 22 years. Yet it would seem that I started this type of life only yesterday. The years have been surprisingly fast, and Zami, Winnie, has been a real brick. Throughout these years, we've been guided by the conviction that the entire world, our beloveds, our homes, our strength, and dreams are right in our hearts. Thinking of you and the warm sentiments expressed in your letter have helped to strengthen that conviction. Not only poised, but remarkably committed. When you are feeling insecure and unsure, step back and realize the fact that you are even here is a feat within itself. There is so much that could have gone wrong in the history of your families. The fact that you are here in this moment in time is remarkable. The fact that you have the privilege of guiding a company, guiding a country, guiding the life of another human being as a parent is mind-blowing. Your founders, your ancestors have stories that should give you fuel. There is a story in each of us that can give us perspective, power, perseverance, and poise. He who listens to the voice of the elder, like Dr. Martin Luther King, like Mr. Nelson Mandela, is a strong tree. But he who covers his ears is like a branch in the wind. Are you a strong tree? My name is Yoli Chisholm, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to honor my ancestors and plant a seed in your life. Thank you.